Okay, so welcome to this class, this NLP meetup online, communication skills with heart. Usually we do these meetups in person in Barcelona. We've been doing this for many years. I forget how many years. It's just been a long time. And it started off weekly, and then it went like 2 times a month, and then once a month. Now we keep it at once a month, doing the NLP meetups, unless there's some extra topics that come up. And last month we were talking all about conflicts, navigating conflicts and communication within people when there are different perspectives coming up. And we will touch upon that briefly today as well, because obviously today's topic is all about communication. And yeah, so this is the thing, like NLP is one of these wonderful practices that we can learn a lot of useful tools and techniques that can help us with communication skills. And I will literally just share like a little snippet today, because there is so much. I've literally just like got a whole page of stuff, which we probably won't even get through all of it today, because this is the thing, NLP, that there is so much within NLP that can help with communication. After all, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, linguistics is all about the language and how we communicate to ourselves and others. So it's a massive part of NLP. So I will share some useful tips and tools, and then feel free to ask questions when you have questions. Just unmute yourself anytime. If there's something that comes up, I'd much rather just ask it in the moment if you want to ask. This will be a relaxed chat and discussion and class about communication. So first of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about the concept of communicating with heart and what perhaps might prevent us from communicating from the heart. So what do you think that could be? If we have that intention to communicate from the heart, if there was something to prevent that, what do you think that could be? What would prevent us from communicating?
Fear.
Yeah, so fear. And in the chat, yeah, fear, shame. Yeah, so certain emotions. Yeah, so this is the thing, like certain emotional states, we can have emotional states that feel expansive, that open us up and want us, like help us to connect to people. And then there are other emotional states that more to do with our beliefs about that particular emotion, though obviously like the energy of that emotion as well. We have the tendency to want to withdraw and close and go in like inwards and shy away from communicating or really communicating from the heart. And fear is one of those. So absolutely, that's one thing that can prevent us from communicating with heart if we're stuck in that fear state. This is the thing, fear is not something bad or terrible. Sometimes it's painted that way. It's when we're stuck in that state, that's when it's not so useful. So just allowing that fear to pass through us and let it flow, that's absolutely fine, because fear is something that is very useful in terms of protecting us in some instances. There's a wonderful book called the Language of Emotions, and it talks about how when fear is in flow, so not when it's stuck or when we're attached to it, when fear is in flow, that's that intuitive knowing of something doesn't feel right, something's off, something is like, yeah, I don't know what it is, but something is not quite right there. So that's fear in flow, when we're allowing it to flow through us, and we're just picking up on that subtle energy in the beginning. Whereas if we're remaining stuck in that, and it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then that's when all the anxiety and panic attacks and all of that can happen, and that's when it's not so useful. And those of you who've been to my classes before will know that I have experience in the past with that. Panic attacks and anxiety is something that NLP helped me a lot with. So a mixture of NLP, acupuncture, and cutting out caffeine helped me get rid of those panic attacks many years ago. So what else do you think can prevent us from communicating from the heart?
Rage.
What was that?
Rage. Ira en castellano. Ira. Rage.
Oh,
Rage
rage.
or anger.
Yeah, rage.
Anger. Rage.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. All of these emotions, like when we're in that, when something really triggers us and angers us, then it can be very challenging to communicate from the heart space and communicate from a grounded, centered um, place. And then we're caught up in this. And absolutely. So this is the thing, it's like if we have any triggers, if there are any triggers there, and often these triggers come from childhood. So certain experiences in childhood, especially through the years of 0 to 7, that's when we're creating our map of the world. That's when we're creating our blueprint. That's when we're forming all of our beliefs and values. And we can pick up on certain things from other people as well, especially our caretakers. So if there are certain experiences in those first years, or traumas can come afterwards as well, but especially in those first few years, then later on in life, if anything triggers that, if anything like touches upon those beliefs or those traumas, then that's when emotional states can come up, whether that's fear, anger, sadness. So if there's a trigger there that something irritates us, then in the moment, sometimes it can be useful just to take a few deep breaths and gather our thoughts before we respond to the person if we're feeling triggered. Easier said than done sometimes. And yeah, so it's like being mindful about not speaking from an emotional state. So this is why like emotional state is really important. If we want to communicate with heart and then we're feeling really angry about something, or feeling really sad about something, or feeling really fearful about something, perhaps it's not the moment to sit down and have a conversation. Like this summer I went through quite a powerful experience with someone, and we actually took some time apart before we actually sat down and communicated, because in the moment we were not in the state to be able to communicate with each other. It was something that we actually needed that space. So this is the thing, it's like recognizing where you're at, what you're feeling, and taking a moment, if you can, just to look after yourself and take a few deep breaths, whether that's 5 minutes or whether that's a bit longer. First, communicate that to the other person, obviously, rather than storming out and not saying anything. and say, okay, yeah, let's get back and let's communicate at this state or this time, and then you're able to communicate easier from more of a heartfelt space when you've actually had a time to process whatever emotions are there. So had a time to, like, if you're feeling anger, it can be really useful to go and punch some pillows or like scream in the forest or something, just to scream into your pillow, just to let go of that first before communicating, if it's something that really irritates you. So sometimes also one thing that can prevent us from communicating with heart is having that really strong ego attachment to our beliefs and our map. Like in NLP, we call it our map. Like everyone has their map that they walk through life with, their blueprint. So it's what I was talking about earlier, about the beliefs and values that are formed. So when we have a very strong identity and attachment to that, more than we're valuing curiosity and growth and learning, and sometimes this can be an issue, and this is something I've noticed a lot, especially this year. All of the different perspectives going on, whether that's in person or whether that's like online, to do with recent events. Like there's so many opinions flying about. It's this, it's that. I have the right answer. No, I have the right answer. I've got the link that proves everything. I've got the video that proves everything. Constantly kind of battling it out, and everyone wanting to prove that they're right. this can be an issue, because this can create a block in terms of when we're communicating with someone, and this can prevent us from really communicating from the heart if we're more attached to our beliefs and our identity. Often it can be at an identity level. Like sometimes we're so attached to these beliefs that if anyone or anything was to question that, it's like, oh no, I can't hear that, because on an unconscious level we might not be conscious of this, but at an unconscious level, to question what we believe or what we have believed for many years can be quite a scary thing. So sometimes it's a lot easier to try and force everyone to believe what we believe rather than actually be open to hearing different perspectives. So it's questioning that and asking, okay, am I more attached to my beliefs and my ego, my identity, or am I open to learning? Am I open to growing? Am I open to evolving? Am I open to hearing different perspectives? Doesn't mean I have to believe it, doesn't mean I have to agree with everything, but am I open to that? And this is something that as humanity we're all learning. This is something that I've certainly come across a lot this year, and it's something I'm continuing to learn as well, that how can, like, the more open we can be to hearing different perspectives and considering different things, then that's one of the keys right there for peace on this planet. If we're able to tolerate, and exactly, so in the chat you say intolerance, so yeah, if we could bring more tolerance and not being so intolerant, and be more accepting and tolerant of other people, then this is a wonderful thing for this planet and humanity. So yeah, that's something to consider, like my beliefs, my identity, everything wrapped up in that, or am I open to hearing and questioning and exploring and learning and growing? And we don't have to do everything perfectly. Obviously, we're human beings, and there'll be moments where we're kind of like backwards and forwards. It's just overall having that reminder, just coming back. Okay, what can I learn from this? What can I learn from this? Like, if there's any one thing that can be one of the biggest game changers in terms of improving communication, is the very essence of NLP. That's curiosity, curious mindset. Curiosity. I wonder, what can I learn from this? I wonder, what is this person teaching me? I wonder if everything and everyone is a mirror, then what's being reflected back to me? What aspect of my shadow is life reflecting back to me for me to wake up to look at, to learn from? Easier said than done sometimes. Yes, it's something that can be useful, and that curious mindset is so important, really, really important. And then sometimes something that can come in the way of communicating with heart and really creating constructive conversations can be simply a lack of awareness and skills. So sometimes there are skills that we haven't learnt. Sometimes there are things that we're not aware of. Perhaps we haven't learnt about nonviolent communication. Perhaps we haven't learnt about communicating from the I rather than you. Perhaps we haven't learned that. Perhaps we haven't learned about the feedback sandwich. So the feedback sandwich is that if we want to give feedback to someone and we say, okay, like, we're giving constructive feedback, and that could be along the lines of, I love this, and next time, have you considered doing this? Overall, this was amazing. It's like giving something of like positive feedback, constructive criticism, positive feedback sandwich. So there are all these little tools and techniques that we can use, and sometimes we don't know this. Sometimes we're not aware of the power of words. We're not aware of what we're communicating to other people. And we can learn about the power of words in terms of listening to other people, also, and like noticing how we feel on the receiving end, like when people are communicating to us, and how we feel on the receiving end, how we're communicating to ourselves as well. So like negative self-talk. So like, how do I feel after those words? There are certain words that can feel really heavy or pressured for some people, and there are other words that can open up things. So for example, if we're saying should, have to, must do, need to, that can feel like a lot of pressure sometimes. Obviously it depends on the person. I know for me, if I'm saying that to myself, or I'm hearing that you should do this or you have to do this, then that can feel like, oh, it's like something to do, it's like a big weight there. Whereas changing the words, being mindful about the power of words, can be really useful. It's like switching those around and considering, I could do that, I can do that, I choose to do that. And notice the difference in terms of how that feels. I should do this, I could do that, I have to do this, I choose to do that. It's different energies. After all, like everything in this world is energy. Everything in this world, that's quantum physicists have proved this time and time again. And this includes the words that we speak, like the vibration, the airwaves that we're communicating. And every word has a different vibration there. So being mindful about how we're, like, what words we're choosing. So how we're communicating to ourselves, how we're communicating to other people. So a lack of awareness on this sometimes can be one of the causes of not being able to communicate from the heart. Now, there's one thing that is really useful and sometimes overlooked. So before we go into the NLP presuppositions, before I go into a little bit of meta model, before I go into some of the other things I want to talk about, there's one thing that's a very big part of communication, and it's often overlooked. What do you think that could be? So we've talked about words. What else is there? Listening. Yeah, so in the chat we have listening. Yeah, that's a very important skill.
Body language.
Body language, intention as well. That's also in the chat. Yeah, really, really good examples. Yeah, so let's go through them. So listening, absolutely. Listening is super important. And this is an important part of communication. So communication is not just a one-way street. It's not like I'm going to just like say everything and not allow the other person to communicate if we're having a conversation. So listening is really important. After all, we have 2 ears, 1 mouth. So it's bringing that back. And I remember hearing this phrase once a long time ago. I was talking about how, are we listening to understand, or are we listening to respond? So when we're communicating with someone, we can be mindful of that and ask ourselves, okay, am I simply just listening and waiting until I can say my point of view and my ego can come in and be like, yeah, this, that, yeah, that. Am I just listening for that? Or am I listening to really understand the other person, really understand what's going on and get curious, what can I learn from this? And how is life teaching me right now? So, and really like understanding what's going on for the person as well. And there's much, much more to do with listening that we can talk about. I mean, obviously today's class is simply just a snippet. This topic could literally be a whole training just alone communication skills. Could be a whole training. So in the chat, we also have intention. So yes, absolutely, the intention that we put behind things is really important. So that energy that we're going into situations with, am I going into a conversation with intention to prove my point is right? Or am I going in with intention to create deeper connection? And confidence as well. Yeah, so that links in with the emotional state. We'll go into that. I'll talk about that in a minute. I'll share a slide with you all. So absolutely, how we feel about ourselves can influence that. And Anna, yeah, you mentioned one of the key things, body language. So often there can be a lot of emphasis on words, the power of words. And it's a super powerful aspect of how we communicate. Yet, body language is often a forgotten thing. Like our physiology and our body language and the energy and everything that we go into conversations with, often that is overlooked, and sometimes it's not even considered part of communication. Yet it is part of communication. We cannot not communicate. So even if you're sat there not saying anything, no words coming out, you're still communicating. You're still communicating something with your facial expressions, with your physiology, with the energy, with intention, everything. So there's a huge part of that which is non-verbal. So we have the words, we have the tone of voice is really important. So the tone of voice that we're using. And we have all of the physiology and the body language as well. So one really simple aspect of that, because again, body language is a whole big topic. There's so much that can be talked about on that. If you haven't seen Amy Cuddy's TED Talk, Body Language Shapes Who You Are, it's a very famous TED Talk from many years ago. If you haven't seen that, watch it. It's really good. It goes into it in much more depth. And there's much more out there in terms of physiology and body language. Though, even if you just want to practice one thing, like between now and the next class, if you want to practice one thing, you can focus on the breath. The inhale and the exhale. So there's a question, what's the name of the TED Talk? So that's Amy Cuddy, Body Language Shapes Who You Are. So Cuddy as in C-U-D-D-Y, Amy Cuddy. So yeah, it's a great talk. So breath is a really useful tool. Breath is like just that inhale and exhale, being mindful of that as you go into conversations can be really useful, because then what that does is it has a knock-on effect on how you feel. So what I'll do is I will share a slide now. I will share what I call the mind body wheel. And I will get that up now. Okay, so can everyone see that? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, great. So mind body wheel. So this is my version of the NLP communication model. So it's my version of that. I'll just see if I can, I'll show you the NLP communication model afterwards. So in NLP, we talk about how there's so much information coming through our senses. So everything that we see, we hear, we feel, there's information coming all the time towards us. Like if we're walking down the street, we're walking on the beach, we're at home, there's all these things there that we can pick up on through our senses. So in NLP, what we say is that we have all of that information that's coming in, and then our mind is processing that we need to have some form of filter there, because there's so much information. Our mind needs to filter it in order to A, not be so overwhelmed by everything, because there's a lot of stuff, and B, know how to like make sense of the events, so then we know how to respond. We know how to respond in that situation. So the NLP communication model focuses on the information coming through the senses, the internal filters, the internal meaning, the representation that we're giving that, and then that has a knock-on effect on our emotional state and our physiology. Now, I put it in the wheel format because A, I found it a lot easier personally to see it in that format, and also B, I found it made a lot more sense because it can work in both directions. So if you've seen that TED Talk that I mentioned just now by Amy Cuddy, she talks about how our physiology and our body posture and what she calls power poses, so poses where we're in a position of power, if you use that, you can influence your emotional state, you can influence the internal meaning, you can influence the beliefs. So the internal filters are the beliefs. You can influence it going around the other way as well. So it works in both directions. Everything is connected, the mind and body, everything. So for example, let's say you have someone at an event. So I personally love the beach, and I'm just going to check the message. Okay, so someone's having some, Sarah's having some technical issues. Okay, that's fine. So let's say that there's an example of a particular situation. So for example, I love the beach, I enjoy the beach, but I do know people that hate the beach, that they don't like it. Two different filters. So the internal filters, so what you see in the orange circle, internal filters, that's the beliefs, the values, the meta programs, language, everything, like all the experiences and everything that we have there stored at unconscious level that forms our blueprint, that forms our map. That's what we go by. And our mind, our RAS, our reticular activating system, organizes things according to the internal filters that we have, according to our map that we have, our personal map. So in my map, beaches are wonderful. Beaches are great. In the map of someone who doesn't like beaches, perhaps they had a negative experience. Perhaps they formed a belief around beaches from a particular experience that they don't like it. They don't like the sand, or they don't like the people, they don't like the heat, or whatever it is. So you can see how there can be different beliefs coming up for different people. So that's the internal filters. So for example, the vent would be the beach. So that would be the situation, that would be on the beach. Maybe there's like a picnic or a gathering on the beach. So both people, like both myself and someone else, we would be receiving information through our senses. So we will be seeing things, we'll be hearing things, we'll be feeling things. All this information will be coming through our senses. Then, according to our map, we will form a meaning. We will form a story about that. So because in my map of the world, beaches are great. So then my internal meaning, my story might be like, oh, this is wonderful. I'm really enjoying this. Or beaches are lovely. This is wonderful to have a picnic on the beach with friends. Whereas the other person, if they don't like beaches, then it might be like, oh, sand is getting everywhere. The wind is blowing my hair in my face. I can't like keep my shoes or feet or bag clean. Like everything's like they might be worried about that. So you can see how the focus is different according to what we're thinking and believing. So according to that, what we're thinking and believing, that can have a knock-on effect on the emotional state. So if I'm thinking beaches are wonderful and this is great, having a picnic on the beach, my emotional state most probably would be more open, more uplifted, feel more confident, feel more joyful, feel more happy, feel more loving, connected, because I feel good about the situation because of what I've been thinking and believing about the situation. Whereas the other person who doesn't like beaches, if they're worried about all the sand getting everywhere and it's the wind blowing everything and whatever it is, then their emotional state might be very different. There might be some irritation there. There might be there might be some other emotions there, whether that's irritation or not, or feeling fearful or feeling sad or whatever might come up for that individual. Whatever we're feeling, what the emotional state is that we have, that has an effect on the physiology. So if I'm feeling good, my physiology most probably will be more open and receptive. Maybe I'll be smiling, my physiology would be displaying that. Whereas the other person who's feeling irritated, do you think they'll be arms up in the air smiling at everyone? Probably not. So you can see how things connect, and then that has how we're feeling and what's happening with our physiology, then that influences our behavior, what we do. So perhaps I will stay on the beach a long time, perhaps I will interact with people, maybe the other person will want to leave early. And it can work around the other way as well. So this is an important point to notice. The reason why I bring this up for this communication class is because if we're going into a conversation and the internal meaning that we're saying to ourselves is, oh, this is terrible, this is rubbish, they don't understand me, or I can't communicate, I'm not a good communicator, blah, 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 then notice how we will be feeling. Notice the emotional state, notice the physiology, notice the behavior and actions that could occur thanks to that. Whereas if we have the internal meaning, the thoughts and the beliefs of, this is an opportunity for growth, I wonder what I can learn from this, I'm going to get curious and explore, notice how that could produce a different emotional state. That could also have a different effect on the physiology. That could provoke different actions and behaviors. So I'm giving two extreme examples just to make it really clear, like two complete opposite examples, just to make it really clear so you can understand that, yes, what we're thinking and believing has a very strong effect on how we feel, and how we feel like is so key to when we go into conversations. Because has anyone here seen the film Inside Out, with the different characters of the emotions? You got anger, joy, sadness. Yeah, great film. It's something like each time you watch it, you can learn something new. So yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about that. Just if anyone wants to take a screenshot of that, do so now. If not, I can send you the image as well, the PDF, and then I'll stop sharing. So yeah, Inside Out is wonderful. It's really wonderful. It has so many hidden messages in there. And so the thing with Inside Out is that there are different islands, and this young girl, so inside her mind, has all of the core beliefs and all the memories and everything there, and all the different emotions. And there are these islands, and these islands are almost like an example of the values, the things that she values in life. And when she goes through a period of time where she's feeling a little bit depressed and a little bit sad, then the bridges between the islands start crumbling down, start breaking down. And sometimes this is what can happen if we are not noticing or looking after our emotional state. and our emotional state starts to drop down, then sometimes it's like we can't access all the resources that we have internally. We have everything there. We have all the skills. We have all the resources within. We're all very resourceful people. Yet sometimes when our emotional state is down, or we're feeling like not energized, we're feeling low in energy, feeling sad, blah, 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 it's almost like at some level unconsciously we can't access everything that we have within. So this is why it's so important to boost our emotional state, especially when we're going into important conversations, because we want to be able to access all of the resources that we have within. Because if I'm going into a conversation feeling really low in energy and really sad, then that might not be the best conversation. So before I speak with clients, it's really, really important that I'm doing something to lift myself up, to feel good, because then I know I'm able to go into that from a much better place. So that's what you were saying earlier about confidence in the chat. Yeah, confidence, that links in with emotional status. If we go into conversations with that confidence, then we can have conversations that can be a lot more constructive. So that TED Talk by Amy Cuddy, she talks about power poses, and some of these things can boost confidence. So power poses are different poses where we can have our arms up in the air or our hands on our hips, as if you're like a superpower, like superhero. You've got superpowers, or like arms straight out in front like Superman. So they've actually done studies, and they've proven that within the studies that the people who did some of those power poses, even just for a minute or two before going into an exam or before going into an interview, they actually performed better than the people who didn't. So this goes to show how everything's connected. Mind, body is all connected. What we're thinking about, what we're doing with our body, how we're feeling, it's all connected. So we can go at it from many different levels, and we can really go into these conversations with that extra boost. It's like, yeah, I've got this. Okay, I'm gonna go and have a great interview and feel good about that. So yeah, so physiology, body language, emotional state, all of that is super, super important in terms of conversation and communication. Any questions on that before we move on? No? Okay. So let's move on. So in NLP, we have a list of statements that we call presuppositions, NLP presuppositions. So you might have heard some of these in the meetups if you've attended. Some of these might be new as well to you. These are a list of statements that we presuppose to be true. So if we're training to be a practitioner, we presuppose these to be true in order to provide the best possible service for the clients. These can also be so useful in our day-to-day life. Really, really, really useful. And these are like, some of these have become things that I live by. Like, they're literally just integrated now. They're so, like, they just make complete sense, and it's like, yep, that's how it is. And just by knowing these can bring so much more openness and perspective on things. And it's like, okay, perhaps that's why that was happening, or perhaps that's why that person reacted in that way, or okay, perhaps I'm going to think before I speak next time, because you can, thanks to these presuppositions, that they can bring some great insight. So there's a long list. I'm not going to go into all of them. One of them, so there are 4 that I want to share. One of them is super important. And, well, actually all of them are really important. But as we were talking about how we all have maps, we all have different maps of the world. We all have our map that we go by. It's like, this is my map. This is how I go through life with this map, and this has a list of my beliefs and values, and another person has a different map. So one of the presuppositions, one of the statements is respect the other person's model of the world. Have respect for the other person's map, like how they're seeing things, how they're experiencing life. Each and every person is different. This might be how I see things, and then that might be how someone else sees things. So it's having respect and respecting that. It's like, okay, I might not agree, though as a human being, they're entitled to their own thoughts, beliefs, and opinions. And that's something really important to remember. And especially this year, with everything going on, it's like to respect each other's maps of the world is really important. Have respect for each other. The other one I want to share is people are not their behaviors. People are not their behaviors. So yeah, how I see this, there can be different ways to interpret this. How I see this is that people may do certain things or act in certain ways. And quite often what we do is we attach labels to that, and we attach labels to people because of their behaviors or how they act or how they go about things. Yet deep, 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 deep down, they're a soul, they're a human being. Underneath it all, we're all human beings on this planet, and like virtually 99.9% of us, if not all, are looking to feel loved and have a sense of belonging and connect with each other. And we might go about it in different ways, and maybe we're not consciously aware of that in certain situations. Yet underneath, we're all on this crazy planet together. And it's remembering that it's like, okay, people are not their behaviors. So someone may do certain things that we don't agree with or we don't like, yet underneath there is still a human being that's looking to feel loved. So it's starting to separate the person, the human being, from the behavior, rather than lumping it all in one big thing and just labeling that person as a horrible person. And then if we do that, every time we'll interact with that person, then we might find it rather challenging to communicate from the heart if we've labeled them as a horrible person. So it's like understanding, okay, yeah, people are not their behaviors. The third one I want to share is everyone is doing the best that they can with the resources that they have. So the resources meaning the emotional state that they're currently in and their map of beliefs and values that they're connected to, and everything else. But remembering this is that because sometimes we might think, oh, why didn't that person do this? Or why didn't they say that? Or why didn't they apologize? Or why didn't blah, blah, blah. It's very easy to point the finger and blame. And I've certainly done this many times in my life. And then it takes a moment just to realize, okay, yeah, actually, everyone is simply just doing the best that they can in that moment with the emotional state that they have in that moment. Even when people are saying horrible, horrible things to other people, they're simply just doing the best that they know how in that moment, according to how they feel and what they believe about themselves and the world. So this can be a wonderful way to start feeling a little bit more compassion towards the other person. It's like, okay, perhaps in order for that person to say that, or to not apologize, or not to not like want to communicate in a loving way, maybe they're going through something difficult, maybe they're going through something challenging, maybe there's more to the picture. It's very easy to assume things and make judgments. So that's where the curious mindset comes in useful, because we can expand the perspective. I wonder what else is going on here. Is it really that that person doesn't like me if they don't say hello? Or perhaps are they having a bad day? Is it really that that person doesn't want to like connect or like have you in their life if they don't respond to your message? Or is it because perhaps they're going through something challenging? So everyone's doing the best that they can with the resources that they have. And then the final one I want to share is the map is not the territory. The map is not the territory. So my map is my map. Your map is your map. And the map, the reality in the middle, the territory, is something else. It's like I'm looking at the reality through my filters, like my glasses. We all have different pairs of glasses. So I'm looking at reality through these glasses. And then someone else is looking at reality through a different pair of glasses. We all see things in slightly different ways. And so much of what we're experiencing and what we're seeing is determined according to our map, our past experiences, our beliefs, our values, all of that. So this is where if we want to communicate with heart, it can be really useful to remember this and not get caught up in that ego battle of I'm right and my map is right. This is how it is. This is reality here. This is the reality. Everything else, no. No, it's not like that. The map is not the territory. So it's like, okay, I have my perspective. You have your perspective. Let's find the common ground. So this is something that can be really useful. So those four alone, those presuppositions, those NLP presuppositions, those alone can be a game changer. Just being mindful of those. Respect the other person's model of the world. People are not their behaviors. Everyone's doing the best that they can. The map is not the territory. Those alone can be a game changer. So there's another thing that can be really useful in terms of communicating with heart and helping to create more clarity in conversation. Because sometimes one of the things that can cause misunderstandings, that can bring up triggers in people, that can leave out that deeper heartfelt communication is the lack of crystal clear communication. It's like being vague and just not really like giving details. And there's one linguistic pattern that we use in NLP, which is called the meta model. So the meta model is a series of different phrases and responses and linguistic patterns of how we can actually gain more clarity. And I found this super useful. Super useful. So not only just in coaching and in sessions, but also in personal life with family members, with friends, loved ones. If anything is being communicated and I'm not quite sure what they mean, or that something's a little bit vague, getting crystal clear right in the beginning can save so many conflicts. Can really clear things up, and then it saves like a lot of headaches later on. So for example, if someone says, you make me sad, they just say that. The response using meta model would be, what specifically did I do to make you sad, or how specifically did I make you sad? Or like using any of the how, what, which, where, when, whom, any of those words to gain clarity. I will share a screenshot in a moment of the meta model. So it's using any of those to really gain clarity, like what's behind that? Where did this come from? When was that decided? Using these questions to get clear on what's happening. Because then you can clear up any miscommunication in the moment. There's one word that we tend to avoid. Can anyone guess what that might be? So we use what, we use which, where, when, how, whom. It's one word that we tend to avoid, and that is the word why. So it's not to say we can never use why. Why is an important word. So when we're practicing meta model, if we respond with why, sometimes that can bring a defensive response, and the other person can bring up some defensiveness. So if someone says, oh, that makes me sad, and then we say, why? Like, why does that make me sad? Sometimes the other person can feel a little bit defensive. So what can be easier is to ask, what is it about that brings up sadness for you? By asking it in that way, what we're doing is we're getting to the root, we're getting clearer on what's really going on, rather than provoking the excuse from the other person. So the why sometimes can bring up the excuse or the defensiveness from the other person, whereas if we're coming in with what or where or when or which, that can help us gain more clarity and create more crystal clear communication. So I will just share a screen of the meta model so you can just have a little look. Okay, so this is like a sneak peek of everything that people get on the practitioner training manual. There's so much information. It's like 137 pages in total. Techniques and tools. And the meta model is the beginning. As you can see, we learned so many things about SMART goals, about unconscious. That's what I said earlier. You cannot not communicate. We're always communicating, even if we think we're not talking. We go through rep systems. Okay, so meta model patterns. So there's a page here of the meta model. So we won't go through all of this, but just so you can have a little bit of an example. So you can see how there's a pattern on the left-hand column, and then there's a response in the middle column. And that response can be a useful way in how to respond whenever there is a particular thing that comes up. So we have, so number one says, you don't like me. So the response using meta model is, how do you know I don't like you? So that helps to bring out more clarity, find out what's really going on. And you can see further down, there's more. Number 4, she's always yelling at me. She doesn't like me. So if you've ever had a friend or a family member saying something like that, like, oh, she's always doing this or he's always doing that, that means this. We can respond with, how does that mean this? Because what's happening here is that sometimes we can create these limiting beliefs where we're attaching something with a meaning. It's like, this is this. This means this. This equals this. Sometimes it's not always like that. This is the thing with limiting beliefs, that we state things as if that's how they are all the time, and it's not necessarily like that. So you can notice how in the response column that they all begin with how, who, And then further down, what, how specifically. It's just a useful way to really get clearer, to gain more clarity in conversation. And to, when we communicate with crystal clear communication, and when we ask questions to help gain more clarity, we're able to open up space for the heart to come through, and we're clearing away all the cobwebs of any possible triggers, anything that might get in the way of that. So if anyone wants to take a screenshot of that beginning bit, feel free to do so now. This is meta model pattern. This is something we go into in much more depth on the training, and also on the NLP introduction training that's coming up next week. So yeah, meta model is all about gaining clarity. Okay, so one extra thing that can be really useful, and we can perhaps do a little bit of a demo if there are any people that want to practice, and we can see as a group how that works. And this is something that those of you who are familiar with improv, you might know this. Can anyone guess what that might be? How to help us communicate with heart and create more connection. So it's talking about how to reframe things and using like different reframes. And there's one reframe which is called the agreement reframe. And in improv, they use this a lot. So it's when we say yes and. Yes and. So when we're communicating with someone, and one way to cut off communication and shut down communication and bring up some triggers is to say no but, and then bring our opinion. It's like, no but this, no but that, no it's not like this, it's like that. And what we're doing is we're creating this brick wall, and that's blocking off communicating from the heart. Whereas if we open that up and we say, yes, and have you considered this? And then we offer an alternative perspective. That's one way that we can open up to more connection, and opening up to more possible heart connection. Yes, and. So for example, someone says, so for example, I plan to go out for dinner with someone, and then they say to me, oh, how about going to that wonderful like beef burger place down the road? And I don't eat meat, so I'll be like, not the place for me to go. But if they say that, I could, obviously I would say I don't eat meat, but then I could say, yes, and have you heard about Have you heard about the sushi place down the road? Or have you heard about the amazing Indian place that's just around the corner? It's like offering a different option, a different alternative. And instead of like shutting it down and cutting it down and saying, no, but blah, 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 because then that can feel a bit triggering for the other person, we're saying, yes, and what about this? Yes, and So we're offering a different perspective. They use this in improv comedy because improv works on this relationship and this dynamic between the people, between the comedians and the actors that are on stage. Like they always want to have this continuous flow of adding to the scene, adding more. So if any of them comes on with an idea and then someone says no, and then shuts it down and does something else, that interrupts the flow. Whereas they work with this dynamic of yes and. They have this as this mantra in their mind, yes and it just keeps on adding. It helps to create more connection. It helps to develop things further. So this is in NLP, we call it the agreement reframe. So it's a way to encourage agreement, a way to find a common ground, something that can be really useful in minimizing minimizing conflicts with people. So yes, and. Does anyone want to practice that? Anyone want to practice? Someone can practice that with me, or you can, if there are a couple of people, you can practice on each other. Literally just for like a couple of seconds, just to, someone can suggest some, yeah, Lisa. Great. Wonderful. Anyone else want to practice, or shall I join in? Okay, I'll join in. Okay, so Lisa, I will suggest an activity, something that we could do. And I want you to, we'll practice it a couple of ways. So first, I want you to say no, but da da da. And then I want you to try with the yes and we'll just notice as a group, like what the difference is between them. So Lisa, I've just heard about this amazing like African drumming session on the beach. I think it'll be so much fun if we go to the beach and learn how to do all this drumming on the beach. Do you want to come?
No, but we could go to the movies.
They go to the movies. Yeah. So how did you feel saying that?
That's awful. I'm all, no, of course I want to go to the beach and play on the drums. That wasn't fair.
I know, I gave you a hard one. Okay, so now we'll practice it again. So I'll give the exact same thing and then you can do a yes and you can add on something extra to the activity. So Lisa, there's this amazing African drumming session on the beach. Like there's going to be a group of people and everyone's going to be drumming away on these African drums. Do you want to come?
Yes, and we could also look at going to maybe a static dance a little later or another time.
Now you're talking, yes. Wonderful. Okay, good. So now let's practice it the other way. So you choose an activity and then I will do the no but and then I'll do the yes and.
Oh, let's see, Emma, would you like to go to Croatia for the weekend?
No, but I could go down the road. I mean, in Kubias, they have a nice beach there. So yeah, no, Croatia, I can't. No.
Let's see. So I'll ask you again, and I'll tell you. Let's see. So let's go to Croatia for the weekend.
Oh, yes, and I'd love to learn more about their culture and their cuisine. Perhaps there are some nice restaurants that we can find that we can check out as well. Some great eats. Perhaps the Lonely Planet has some tips.
Perfect.
So wonderful, thanks, Lisa. So yeah, can you see the difference? Can you feel the difference? Can you hear the difference? And those of you who are listening and observing as well, like the difference between that, like how one shuts everything down and then the other is like adds on, and it creates this wonderful flow. And this is how we're able to use communication skills to create more heart-centered connection. Yeah, Isabel.
Yes, but when we want to say no, to express boundaries, we're not going to say a yes.
Yes, good question. So this is when we can simply just be honest and authentic and be really mindful about the energy that we're bringing in and the intention, like setting boundaries is really useful in certain situations, especially. And also it can be really wonderful to, like, we can still set boundaries with love. Like, boundaries doesn't have to be this harsh thing that comes down. I mean, maybe in some circumstances we have to be really firm, but we can set boundaries with love. So it's like, if we do need to say no, we can say something along the lines of, I'm practicing to tune in to what things feel good and what things don't feel good for me, and right now this is a no. And you can add on something else extra to that. So that's one example.
Yes, and I'm referring to this because in my past I had said no and repeated no, and I got sexually abused. So it's like, even if, so when my no isn't even taken in account.
Well, this is an extreme example, and in those instances, it needs to be a firm no, and you need to look after yourself and make sure that you're in a safe surrounding and situation, that you have support around you. Yeah, absolutely. So that there can be situations where we do have to give a really firm no. These like yes and agreements, or saying like, yeah, I'm noticing what feels right and what doesn't, and at the moment it's a no, or at the moment it's a maybe, or da. This is for general conversation. This is for general day-to-day conversation. But it's important, if there are any situations where you do feel that there has to be a firm no, then absolutely say a firm no and seek the support around, because there is support around as well. Yeah, wonderful. So those are a few things in terms of what can help in terms of communicating with heart. And I think one of the things is useful to remember is, what's the greater objective, like the greater vision, like what's the reason? And notice I'm keep on using what, I'm not using why here. What's the greater reason or purpose for communicating with heart? Is it to create deeper connection with someone? Is it to really feel that true, authentic connection? So rather than connecting from the mask, that we're actually opening up and connecting at a deeper level. So being aware of what that vision is when we go into certain conversations can be really wonderful. This is what we were talking about earlier with that intention. Like, what's the intention there? What do we want to create? And what can be the wonderful things that can blossom from communicating from the heart center? And being mindful of it. This is something that comes up a lot in relationships. It's very easy for the ego to give lots of complaints and complain about things and say, I don't like this is wrong, this, like, why don't you ever do this? Why do you blah blah blah, like give lots of complaints. And if we notice that we start complaining to the other for not doing certain things, not behaving in a certain way, this can be a wonderful point for us to check in and ask ourselves, what's the desire under the complaint? Because under the complaint of the ego is the desire of the inner child. The inner child has some desire there, that wants something. So if I'm complaining to a partner for, like, I'll just give a random example. So for example, if I'm complaining to a partner because they keep on looking at another woman across the street or whatever, a random example, what's the desire under that? Perhaps there's a desire for me to create deeper connection there. So what I can do is I can check in with myself and then communicate the desire rather than the complaint. So rather than like throw lots of complaints at the other person, I can communicate the desire and say, hey, I noticed this coming up, and what I want is this. How can we make this work? So then what you're doing is you're communicating from the heart, truly. You're communicating from this authentic space and saying, hey, this is what's come out, this is how I feel, this is what I desire, rather than just holding that within and not saying anything and then coming out with loads of passive aggressive comments later on. So communicate the desire, not the complaints. There's always a desire underneath that. And this is one really powerful way to communicate from the heart. There are ways to create more deeper connection there, and to really create this wonderful harmony as well. And then sometimes we get caught up in those triggers, in those masks, in those beliefs, in those maps that we have. It's like, this is how it is. And the more we're attached to all of that, the more brick walls and chaos we're creating. There's like taking some moments just to like observe how we're actually communicating and what triggers us, what's coming up, and then we can learn about that. And like, okay, interesting, very interesting. Okay, what can I learn about this? What's the desire there? What do I really want? What is this person mirroring back to me? Are they reflecting anything back to me? Some of you may have heard this story that I was coming back from the airport, and I attracted this really angry taxi driver. For some reason, out of all the taxi drivers that I picked, like this really angry one that was just like, this was years ago, and he was just like swearing and shouting and like being like road rage, just like being really grumpy and angry with everyone. I was thinking, gosh, this is really interesting. Like if I'm using that perspective or that metaphor of people around us are mirrors of what's going on in our unconscious, so that like life wakes us up, so then we can become aware, we can become conscious of our unconscious. So by using that metaphor, it's like, okay, I wonder what this taxi driver is highlighting to me. Like, what am I angry about? And then I realized that I hadn't acknowledged the fact that I actually wanted to stay in the UK longer on that particular trip, because it was just a couple of days I was there. It was a very short trip. And I was angry about coming back early. And I hadn't acknowledged that. And it took for me to come across that taxi driver to then acknowledge that. And the funny thing is that when I acknowledged that, I sat in the back of the taxi and I was thinking, okay, that's interesting. And I started to acknowledge my own anger. And then he started to calm down without me saying anything. This is what happens in life. It's like, life is this wonderful play, this wonderful like we're all in these different acts and scenes, and there are all these characters around us, and they're all highlighting different aspects of our light and our shadow. So people can mirror things back as well, and this can be a wonderful way to learn. As annoying as it can be sometimes with certain characters. So yeah, so that's there's been a lot of stuff that we've covered today in terms of like how to communicate with heart and different tips and tools. I will send, I have the contact details for all of you, so I will send you some pictures and screenshots of the meta model, and also the mind body wheel as well. And one thing I'll end the session with is what I covered in the last session, the last class, where I was talking about this image of, if you have one person, then you have another person, and then in the middle you have a number 6 or you have a number 9, and they're arguing about, oh, it's a 6, no, it's a 9. You might have seen this going around social media. So from this perspective, someone's saying it's a 6, and then the other person's saying, no, it's a 9, and they're just like backwards and forwards. And then some people say, well, it depends, whoever put a number there, whatever they wanted it to be, then that's whatever the number is. Though sometimes, how do we know that the person who put that number there, that they had an intention for it to be a 6 or 9? Maybe they just threw it up in the air and allowed it to fall down to start a conversation. Who knows? The reason why I bring this up is that it's very easy to communicate from that first level, of 6 or 9. By taking a step up and finding the common ground, this is where we can create a much deeper connection. We can start communicating from a heartfelt space as well. So it's not a 6 or a 9, it's a number. So if we start communicating from that level, and we start saying, okay, I say it's a 6, you say it's a 9, let's agree it's a number. Sorted. So it's like taking it, this is what we call chunking up, is moving it up a level and becoming aware of, okay, what's the common ground? What's the common ground? Like moving it up, like what is this an example of? So that question, what is this an example of, helps us to move up that level. So if two people are arguing about things, what is this an example of? Like the things that they're arguing about, is there some agreement on that level? That's how you can find agreement and start communicating from the heart, like remembering that intention, that vision of creating more harmony and connection, rather than being attached to our egos and opinions, and which we've all done many points in our life. And this is where we learn that this is what they say, like relationships is where the greatest spiritual teachings happen, the greatest growth happens. But yeah, so we've covered a lot today. Just to recap very briefly, we talked about what prevents us from creating heartfelt communication, like can be that attachment to the beliefs and the ego. It can be this lack of awareness or lack of skills, lack of awareness of like the power of words or body language or breath, all of that. It can also be the triggers and the emotional state. If we're going in with a low emotional state, then that can affect things as well. We talked about the power of the mind-body connection and the mind-body wheel. We talked about that and how our emotional state is so important for us to access all of these resources that we have within us that we can then bring into these conversations. We talked about the 4 presuppositions that can really help. So there are many more, but there are 4 that I covered. So that was respect other people's map of the world. People are not their behaviors. Everyone is doing the best that they can. The map is not the territory. We talked about meta model, how using questions to help us gain more clarity can be really useful. So what, how, which, where, when, whom. And we also mentioned about how why sometimes can bring up a sense of defensiveness. So getting to the root rather than bringing up the complaints with why can be useful in conversation. And we also talked about the yes and agreement reframe. We practiced that a little bit. We noticed the difference between what happens when we are communicating from yes and okay, let's add on to that, let's contribute to that, rather than shutting things down with like no, but my way. So we talked about that, and then we also discussed about like the communicating from the desire, what's underneath that, rather than the complaint. This is a really wonderful way to communicate and create connections. Like communicate the desire, open up to that deeper intention there, and having that vision. So there's so much more. This could be like a full training just alone on this topic, but we'll leave it there. I'll send you a screenshot or a picture of the things I mentioned today. Next week, I'm starting a 3-part NLP training. So it's 3 classes all about NLP, and So module 1 is all about how we create our reality. So we go into it in much more depth in terms of how we create our reality. We go into the filters, we go into the beliefs, we go into all of that, the mind, body, will, in much more depth. We talk about that a lot more. Module 2 is when we're discovering how to uncover hidden limiting beliefs. So if ever you've felt that there's a time where you're like, oh, I have this goal and something keeps on coming up in the way, I don't know what it is, or something's preventing me from having this in my life, it feels like there's some block there, I don't know what that is, we find out how to get rid of, like, first of all, how to find the hidden limiting beliefs, and then we talk about how to let go of limiting beliefs in a very simple process, and the importance of beliefs and all of that. And then we go into module 3, which is understanding ourselves and others. So gaining more insight into who we are, how we communicate, what's our communication style, how other people communicate, who they are, like what is their way of communicating, and we go into that in much more depth. So there's more information on my website about that. It's a 3-part introduction, so it's not an NLP practitioner training, but it's like a little intro training. If anyone's curious to learn more about NLP, but they're not quite sure whether the practitioner training is for them. So this is a wonderful in-between. For that, the full price is €125 for the 3 sessions, plus the PDF manual to keep, plus email support. Yet what I'm doing is the early bird offer, which ends tomorrow, but I will, for everyone here on this call, I will extend it to the end of the week. The early bird offer is just €75. So if you want to join for the 3 classes, €75, you get the PDF, you get everything else, like the 3 live classes like this. We'll go through everything in much more depth, and email support.
What's the schedule, Emma?
Yeah, so it'll be on Wednesday evening, and that will be at 7, I think it's 7 in the evening. So that'll be 3 Wednesdays, 3 consecutive Wednesdays. So starting on the 21st of October, and that'll be the module 1, and then the week after will be module 2, and then the week after module 3. So it's 3 classes, and with that, I'm also giving a free audio download that's part of my audio program that is series 8, and that's based on NLP. So learning about NLP, so you get some audios to keep as well with that. So if you want to learn more about NLP, that's a wonderful way. It's just €75 this week. If you want to join that, just let me know, send me a message. And if anyone wants to dance on Thursday, we're doing dancing. So Thursday, 7:30, we'll do dancing, and that will be part of Creating Change. So Creating Change is a training that I put together, and that incorporates everything I've learned about NLP all together with dance and movement and creativity. So there'll be a free introduction to that on Thursday, and online training for that starts next week as well. So I'm just going to, so I'll send you the photos, like the photos of the meta model and the mind body wheel. And if anyone has any questions, just let me know. Let me know if there's any questions or queries. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining this class today and showing your lovely faces in this group. And I look forward to seeing you again at another class.
Thank you, Emma. Have a good day. Well, good night.
Thank you.
All right, lovely.
Bye.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank you.
you.
Thanks so much for coming. Thanks everyone for joining. Wonderful.
And